Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S MindLab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever feel like your brain just checks out when you are trying to learn something from a video, even when you have the power to go back and rewatch? Well, this new study dives deep into that exact feeling. Today we're talking about what happens when our minds wander during video learning, and whether hitting that rewind button actually helps us learn better. So, the big idea here is that our brains love to wander off task when we're supposed to be learning. Think about it, how many times have you been watching a lecture online, and suddenly you are thinking about what you are going to have for dinner, or a funny meme you saw? That is task-unrelated thought, or mind wandering, and the scientists say it is pretty common. Now, in a video, we have this cool superpower, right? We can rewind. The researchers wanted to know if using that rewind button after we notice our minds have wandered actually helps us learn more. So, they specifically looked at whether rewinding after you catch yourself mind wandering makes a difference in how much you actually learn. They also explored what kind of thoughts make us want to rewind, and if our general learning skills, like how good we are at managing our own learning, play a role. Here's how they did it. They got 222 people to watch a 15-minute video about the bones in the back. Pretty standard stuff, but here's the twist. Whenever a participant noticed their mind wandering, they were supposed to report it. So, what did they find? Well, they noticed that when people had thoughts that were completely unrelated to the video, like thinking about a vacation, they were more likely to hit rewind than if they were thinking about something related to the lecture, but maybe not the exact point being made. This is where it gets really interesting. Even though people were more likely to rewind after having an unrelated thought, rewinding didn't actually lead to better scores on the test they took afterward. So just because you rewind doesn't automatically mean you learned more. That is a bit of a head scratcher, right? They then dug into why this might be happening, and they looked at something called self-regulated learning. This is basically how good someone is at managing their own learning. Think of it like being your own personal study coach. And here is what they found about self-regulated learning. People who scored higher on skills like metacognition, which is basically thinking about your own thinking, and online effort regulation, which is about staying focused and putting in the effort, these people actually reported fewer off-task thoughts. This leads them to a really cool question. Do people who are good at self-regulated learning just naturally have fewer mind-wandering moments? Or are they just better at catching those moments and dealing with them, like rewinding, even if we didn't see a learning boost from it in the study? It is a bit of a chicken and the egg situation. So, what is the big picture here for you, for me, for anyone trying to learn online? The study really highlights that even when we can rewind, we don't do it very often. It's not like we're constantly hitting that button every time our mind drifts. And like we saw, just having the rewind button wasn't enough to magically boost test scores. The negative impact of mind wandering was still there. This is the key takeaway, I think. Instead of just giving students tools like rewind buttons, maybe we should focus on teaching them how to manage their attention in the first place. If you are good at thinking about your own thinking and staying focused, you might just get distracted less often. The core ideas here are about being aware of your own thoughts, your meta. Awareness, how you manage your learning, your self-regulated learning, and of course, the ever-present mind wandering. So, let's break down the experiment a little more. Imagine 222 people are sitting down to watch a 15-minute educational video. Normally, you just watch it, but in this study, there was a special button. Every time they realized their mind had strayed from the video content, they had to click a button. This, in itself, is an act of meta-awareness. You have to be aware that you are not focused to click that button. Once they clicked it, they were asked to choose what kind of thought they were having. This was important because they wanted to see if different types of off-task thoughts led to different actions. For example, one option was on-task, for when they were actually paying attention. Another was everyday personal concerns, the classic mind-wandering category. They also had daydreams. They also looked at lecture, related ideas, which is interesting because it is related to the lecture, but not exactly on task, and how well I am understanding the lecture, which falls into a category called comprehension. Related thoughts. So they basically separated thoughts into on-task thoughts, lecture-related thoughts, comprehension-related thoughts, and then task-unrelated thoughts, or TUTs for everything else. Now, there were a few groups. One was the control group, where they just watched the video and reported thoughts, but couldn't rewind. This is more like how many traditional studies on mind wandering were done, without any easy way to revisit content. Then there was a group where they could rewind, but only after they reported a thought. This was like giving them permission to use the rewind button as a reaction. And a third third group was told they had to rewind after every thought report. They really wanted to push the rewinding behavior. They then tracked when people actually hit rewind. If someone rewound the video within 30 seconds of reporting a thought and went back to a point in the video that was before their last thought report, they counted that as a rewind. So back to research question 1. How often did people actually rewind, even with the instructions? Only about 5% of all thought reports were followed by a rewind. That is pretty low, right? It seems that even when encouraged, learners aren't taking full advantage of the rewind feature. Now, for research question 2, did rewinding make a difference in test scores? And did their self-regulated learning skills matter? Remember, they expected rewinding to help, perhaps by allowing more time to process the material. They used the fancy statistical model to check if rewinding had any impact on the test scores, and if self-regulated learning skills changed that impact. And the results were, frankly, a bit disappointing for the researchers. There was no significant difference in test scores between the groups. Rewinding, whether optional or mandatory, didn't lead to higher scores. Even for the people who did rewind, the number of times they rewound had no connection to their test score. So in this study, rewinding just didn't seem to translate to better learning outcomes. This brings us to research question 3. Were certain types of thoughts more likely to trigger a rewind? Yes, they found that some thoughts made people more likely to rewind. Specifically, those completely out there task-unrelated thoughts, or TUTs, made people much more likely to rewind. It seems when our minds completely drift, we're more inclined to go back and catch up. The estimated probability of rewinding after a TUT was almost 30%, which is significantly higher than for other types of thoughts. This makes sense. If you are daydreaming, you know you've missed a chunk and might want to go back. Now, for research question 4, could someone's self-regulated learning skills predict how many thoughts they reported, and could that, in turn, impact their test score? They use a sophisticated modeling technique called a piecewise structural equation model, or PSME, to untangle these complex relationships. It's like a map showing how different factors influence each other. Here, they found something quite counterintuitive. People who scored higher in metacognition and online effort regulation actually reported fewer off-task thoughts. This is the opposite of what they expected. They thought these skilled learners would be more aware and report more. This suggests that maybe these individuals aren't having fewer off-task thoughts, but perhaps they're better at stopping them before they become noticeable, or they're just more efficient at getting back on track without needing to report it. Importantly, the total number of reported off-task thoughts, regardless of type, didn't predict how well people did on the knowledge test. This again points to the idea that simply being aware of your mind wandering doesn't automatically mean your learning is suffering or improving in this context. When they broke down the thought reports by type, they saw similar patterns. Higher metacognition and effort regulation were linked to fewer TUTs and lecture. Related thoughts. For comprehension-related thoughts, only metacognition was a strong predictor, again showing fewer reports with higher metacognition scores. Finally, research question 5, does self-regulated learning skill predict whether someone rewinds at all? And if they do, how often? They used a special type of model called a hurdle model, which is good for looking at things that might happen 0 times or sometimes, and then how often it happens if it does happen. For the first part, the likelihood of rewinding at all, they found something interesting. People who scored higher in online effort regulation were actually more likely to rewind at least once. This makes intuitive sense. If you are good at effort regulation, you might be more inclined to take action when you notice a problem, like missing content. But here is the catch. For the frequency of rewinding, meaning how often they rewound once they started, those same self-regulated learning skills didn't matter anymore. It seems the decision to take that first step to rewind is linked to effort regulation, but the number of times you do it isn't. So let's talk about what this all means. The study suggested that rewinding after off-task thoughts wasn't a common behavior, and, crucially, it didn't boost test scores in this experiment. This was a bit of a surprise, as you might expect that going back over missed content would help. And it is really interesting that even when instructed to rewind, only a small percentage of potential rewinds actually happened. The fact that rewinding didn't improve test scores suggests that simply having the option isn't enough. Maybe the intent behind the rewind matters more. People rewind to catch missed content because they want to learn. If that motivation isn't there, or the task isn't perceived as critical, the rewind might not be as effective. The finding that higher self-regulation skills predicted fewer reported off-task thoughts is a real head-scratcher. As I mentioned, a big limitation here is that they were using self-caught thought reports. This means they only knew about the off-task thoughts when the participant noticed them. It could be that really skilled learners are better at stopping their mind from wandering in the first place, or they're so good at getting back on track that they don't even register it as a significant off-task moment to report. They might be doing subtle, almost automatic, self-regulation that we can't easily measure with simple reports. And that initial observation about effort regulation predicting whether you rewind at all, but not how often you do it, is super neat. It tells us that the decision to try and fix a lapse in attention is one skill, but the habit of consistently reviewing is another. Now, every study has its limitations, and this one is no different. A major one was that many participants in the experimental groups didn't actually follow the instructions to rewind. This definitely impacted the results for RQ2. The researchers suggest that for future studies trying to see if rewinding works, it might need to be mandatory, not just optional, to get cleaner results. They also think future studies should look at this in more natural learning settings, where students have a real reason to learn and therefore a real motivation to use tools like rewinding effectively. Another limitation was how they measured self-regulated learning. Using questionnaires is common, but observing actual learning behaviors over time, what they call trace data, might give a more accurate picture. And as we touched on, the reliance on self-taught reports means we're missing the moments when people are off task but don't even realize it. If they could measure that, it might change everything. So in conclusion, this study found that rewinding after mind wandering in video learning didn't actually improve test scores. While people were more likely to rewind after completely unrelated thoughts, the act of rewinding itself didn't translate into better learning outcomes in this experiment. On the flip side, higher skills in metacognition and effort regulation were linked to fewer reported off-task thoughts. This suggests that if you are good at managing your learning, you might be better at preventing mind wandering in the first place. The researchers emphasize that for future studies, looking at this in real-life learning situations where people are truly motivated is key. Motivation seems to be a big driver for using learning strategies effectively. They suggest two main paths forward. First, to really understand if self-regulated learners experience fewer off-task thoughts or just manage them better, possibly without even realizing it. And second, to explore other ways learners can try to fix their attention lapses, not just rewinding. Ultimately, this research hints that teaching people how to manage their attention and what to do when they notice their mind wandering might be more powerful than just giving them tools. So, what do you think? Does this resonate with your own learning experiences? Let me know in the comments below. Have you ever found yourself rewinding a video after spacing out? And did it actually help? And what are your favorite strategies for staying focused when learning online? This study really opens up a fascinating conversation about how we learn and how our brains work. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained simply, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.